Hello, and welcome to the Complete History of Science. Series 7, Episode 3. Hven is a place on Earth. In 1575, Tycho stood in front of a lecture hall at the University of Copenhagen. To see a man like Tycho lecture in the 16th century was an unusual sight. Nobles were not normally allowed to teach. It was considered beneath their dignity. But Tycho had become one of the foremost astronomers of the day, and was granted a special exemption by the king himself, Friedrich II. In the busy theatre, he gave an overview of the history of astronomy, starting with Hipparchus and moving on to the present. He spoke of religion, saying that the value of astronomy was to set the human mind free of everyday concerns and direct it towards the heavens. He also defended astrology, arguing that the stars and planets could shape human lives. But the bulk of the lectures was an overview of the state of contemporary astronomy. Universities in the period still used medieval textbooks, based on geocentric theories, but Tycho was more ambitious. Geocentric astronomy, based on the work of Claudius Ptolemy, was 1400 years old, and cracks were beginning to show. In his lectures, Tycho introduced students to Copernicus and the heliocentric model. He recognized the benefits of Copernican astronomy. It simplified the models of Ptolemy and made better predictions. Nevertheless, Tycho was not a full Copernican. He could not accept a moving Earth. To him and most of his contemporaries, a moving Earth was absurd. He expressed to his audience the hope that in the future a new system would appear. Privately, he hoped that he would be the man to create this system. How he might do this was uncertain. He was only a guest lecturer, not a permanent professor. His manuscript on the new star had won him some fame, but his future remained unclear. Keen to continue his astronomical work, Tycho considered going abroad again. That year, he was obliged to attend the coronation of the new Holy Roman Emperor in Regensburg, and planned to use the trip to visit some like-minded friends. For some time, Tycho had corresponded with Wilhelm, Landgrave of Hesse, a German noble with a passion for astronomy. In 1575, while travelling to Regensburg, Tycho took a detour to visit Wilhelm at his estate in Hesse. Tycho delighted in the visit, admiring Wilhelm's collection of astronomical instruments. Wilhelm was a passionate astronomer who had been making his own observations of the sky for 20 years. They compared observations and discussed Wilhelm's grand ambition to create a new star catalogue. Star catalogues contain the position of the fixed stars. They're essential tools for astronomers, serving as a coordinate grid against which other objects can be measured. When, for example, Tycho measured the new star, he looked for its position relative to the other fixed stars in the catalogue. The idea of dating the star catalogues appealed to Tycho. He had always aimed to make observations with a level of precision far beyond that of earlier astronomers, and this kind of accuracy depended on having a reliable set of reference points in the sky. A new, carefully measured star catalogue would be the foundation for that work. But it was a massive undertaking. Wilhelm, despite his enthusiasm and long-standing interest in astronomy, was still an amateur. His duties as a nobleman left him little time to make regular observations. Tycho would like to have stayed longer and continue his discussions with Wilhelm, but his visit was cut short by tragedy. During his stay, Wilhelm's daughter died, and out of respect, Tycho took his leave. He continued on to Regensburg for the coronation. While in Regensburg, Tycho met a man named Thaddeus Hayek. Hayek was a physician and scholar with wide-ranging interests, and the two quickly formed a connection. Their meeting marked the beginning of a correspondence that would last for decades and would become extremely valuable for Tycho. They exchanged thoughts on astronomy, and Tycho confided that he was considering a move to Basel. Basel appealed to him for two reasons. It was home to some of the finest instrument makers in Europe, and it was centrally located, making it easier to stay in contact with other astronomers. On his return to Denmark, though, Tycho was summoned by the Danish king Friedrich. The king had received an emissary from Wilhelm endorsing Tycho's ability as an astronomer. Impressed, he summoned Tycho to speak to him about his future. He may have gotten wind that Tycho was planning to leave Denmark, potentially for good. When Tycho arrived at court, the king was welcoming and eager to keep him in the country. He offered Tycho his choice of 4 fiefs. This offer was not hugely surprising. Tycho was a high-ranking noble, and his younger brothers already managed their own fiefs. Tycho, though, hesitated. He had observed Wilhelm try and balance his duties with his interest in astronomy. As lord of a fief, Tycho would need to manage its lands and assets. Astronomy would always come second. More than anything else, Tycho wanted freedom, pursue his observations unhindered. The idea of moving to Basel still appealed to him, but it came with its own complications. To settle there, he would need to sell his Danish property. His main holding was the family estate at Knudstorp, and selling it to an outsider was unthinkable. The only realistic option was to sell it to one of his younger brothers, though Tycho knew this would not be straightforward. For the moment, he kept his plans quiet. Tycho left court to consider the king's offer. He discussed it with his uncle, Steen Bille, who communicated with the king on Tycho's behalf. Steen informed the king that Tycho still wished to emigrate, but he did leave the door open, suggesting that he might stay if the right offer was made. Tycho had his eye on one particular holding, the island of Hven. Situated between Copenhagen and the royal seat at Elsinore, Hven had once been the site of a major sea battle in 1288, but since then it had faded into obscurity. The island had been without a lord for centuries. What appealed to Tycho was its isolation. On Hven, he felt he would be free to pursue his work without interruption. Friedrich agreed. Tycho could have the island as well as a generous stipend to support his astronomical work. In return, his duties to the king would be minimal. Mainly, he would need to provide horoscopes to the royal family. It was more than he could have hoped for. Tycho pledged himself to the king as his liege lord. Tycho arrived on the island in 1576. Hven was a cold, wet, remote island in the Baltic Sea. It had little value to most people, hence why it had remained without a lord for so long. But to Tycho it was different. It was an opportunity to pursue his astronomy unhindered, a dream come true. At the time, the island contained only a small handful of farms and small holdings. There was a single village of thatched houses and one church, St. Ibs, perched on a hill overlooking the sea. In the centre of the island, Tycho began making plans for 2 buildings, a large house and an observatory. He was deeply involved in the design of both. The house was to be built of red brick with a sandstone trim. Influenced by the Renaissance houses in Italy, it was designed according to principles of symmetry and proportion. The layout was square, with rounded towers at each corner, and oriented north-south. The house needed to be large to accommodate Tycho himself, along with his servants, astronomical assistants, and crucially, his family. Before his time on Hven, it's unclear how his partner, Kirsten Jorgensdatter, fit into his daily life. Tycho's family disapproved of the relationship, and it's unlikely that Kirsten would have lived at the family estate at Knudstorp. This must have placed considerable strain on their relationship, but the grant of the island from the king offered a kind of tacit approval. On Hven, Kirsten would live openly as lady of the house. Between 1574 and 1580, she gave birth 5 times. 3 of the children survived: Magdalene, Sophie, and Elizabeth. The house was a long-term project, taking 4 years to complete. Its construction upset the locals, who had lived without a lord for generations. Before Tycho's arrival, the central land on the island had been used as common grazing ground, but now it was being claimed for his grand house. While the villagers didn't owe taxes, they were required to provide labour. Tycho called on each of the 40 households to contribute 2 days of work per week towards the building. The peasants grumbled that their new lord was a harsh taskmaster. With his metal nose and strange interests in the stars and alchemy, Tycho must have seemed a distant figure, an eccentric nobleman who had descended on their quiet island and turned it upside down. By 1580, the house was finally complete, and the whole family moved in. Tycho named it Uraniborg after Urania, the Greek muse of the heavens. The other building Tycho constructed was a specialised observatory, which he named Stjernborg, meaning star castle. The structure was built at least partially below ground, allowing observations to be made directly from ground level. Stjernborg housed several large astronomical instruments. His goal was to make observations more accurate and precise than any of his predecessors, and in this he would succeed. Construction of the house and observatory began around 1576, but Tycho had been eager to begin immediately. In December of that year, before construction of any of the buildings had started, he took his first observations. On the winter solstice, he measured the position of the sun in order to determine the latitude of Hven. Over the next 25 years, Tycho would repeat this observation annually, turning it into a kind of ritual. Around this time, Tycho also gained his first assistant, Peter Flemlos. Flemlos was a graduate of the University of Copenhagen and had attended Tycho's lectures on astronomy. Tycho trained him in the use of astronomical instruments and entrusted him with one of the most ambitious projects, the creation of the new star catalogue. Star catalogues available in the 16th century dated back to Ptolemy. Earlier astronomers had simply updated these lists, correcting positions where necessary. Tycho, however, had a more ambitious plan. He intended to create a new star catalogue entirely from scratch. It was an enormous task, requiring thousands of observations. Tycho's goal was also to surpass previous star catalogues in precision and accuracy, providing a reliable foundation for all his future astronomical work. It was a project that would occupy Tycho and his assistants for the next 25 years. But during the early stages of his time on Hven, an unexpected event interrupted this work. In November 1577, a new light appeared in the sky. Extremely bright with a bluish hue, its long tail identified it as a comet. Immediately, astrologers across the continent began to predict ill omens. But for Tycho, the comet represented an opportunity to again prove that the ancients were wrong. Aristotle had claimed comets were atmospheric phenomena. He believed they were close to Earth in what he called the sublunar realm. Tycho doubted this, suspecting that the comet, like the new star he had measured 5 years earlier, was beyond the moon. To prove this, he would again need to measure its parallax and show that it was negligible. He set about making observations. Measuring the parallax of the comet was more difficult than it had been for the new star. The new star had remained fixed against the background, making its position easy to track. A comet, by contrast, was known to move across the sky. This raised a problem. How could you measure its apparent shift due to parallax when the comet itself was in motion? Earlier astronomers had attempted to do this, but they couldn't distinguish between the comet's true motion and the apparent motion caused by viewing it from different locations on Earth. Tycho found an ingenious way to separate the comet's real motion from parallax, and his method relied on accurately knowing the time. By now, the wealthy could afford mechanical clocks, and these were becoming reliable enough for serious timekeeping. He began by making all his observations at the same time each night. This was crucial. Observations made 24 hours apart are effectively taken from the same point on Earth, since the observer returns to the same position in space relative to the background stars. That means any change in the position from night to night could be attributed to the comet's actual movement across the sky, rather than parallax. Over a period of 10 nights, Tycho observed the comet move about 20 degrees. This corresponds to an average of roughly 5 minutes of arc per hour, where, to be clear, a minute is a measure of angle, equal to 1/60th of a degree. Tycho assumed this motion was constant, and used it to estimate the comet's expected position at different times on a given night. By comparing this predicted position with what he actually observed, he could isolate any discrepancy which would be due to parallax. At this point, it's worth remembering that Tycho didn't believe the Earth rotated. In his model, it was the heavens that moved around a stationary Earth. But for the purpose of measuring parallax, this distinction doesn't matter. Whether the Earth rotates or the heavens do, the geometry is the same. Next, Tycho set out to measure the parallax. He did this by measuring the position of the comet over a single night, taking measurements 3 hours apart. During that time, he measured a change of about 12 minutes of arc, or just under 5 minutes per hour. This was just a little bit smaller than the change due to the real motion of the comet. From this, Tycho concluded that the parallax was very small, too small to be consistent with an object located in the atmosphere, or even within the orbit of the Moon. His final estimate placed the comet at a distance roughly 6 times greater than that of the Moon. This was another nail firmly hammered into Aristotle's coffin. Tycho continued to observe the comet for several months, until it disappeared from view in late January 1578. As he tracked its path, he noticed something peculiar about its motion. At first, the comet appeared to move in the same direction as the planets. Then it passed in front of the Sun. Afterwards, it seemed to move away from the Sun and then back towards it again. To Tycho, the comet's path suggested it was orbiting the Sun. This was a startling conclusion. If comets could orbit the Sun, then not everything in the heavens revolved around the Earth. Tycho clearly recognized the implications. He didn't publish anything immediately. Instead, he dwelt on these observations for nearly a decade. In the years that followed, many others published their own account of the comet, but no one, other than Tycho, seemed to grasp its deeper significance. By this point, he had abandoned the geocentrism of Ptolemy, but he couldn't accept the Copernican model either. While he saw that some objects could orbit the Sun, he remained convinced the Earth must be still. With the completion of Uraniborg and Sturenborg in the early 1580s, Tycho was finally equipped to make the observations he needed. Outside the walls of Uraniborg, the island remained as quiet as ever. The peasants farmed their narrow strips of land, while Tycho worked undisturbed throughout the night. Over the next decade, he pursued several goals. He would create a new star catalogue and measure key astronomical constants. But his greatest ambition was to replace the models of Ptolemy and Copernicus. He knew this was the central problem facing astronomy, and rightly, he believed he was now the only person with the means to solve it. So, on his quiet, cold, isolated island in the Baltic, Tycho set out to redraw the heavens.